Hi, everyone. This is Benjamin Bratton, the program director of the New Normal program at Strelka Institute of Media Architecture and Design in Moscow. Happy to join you this morning, however, from La Jolla, the University of California, San Diego. And I wanted to, first of all, thank you for joining this morning or this evening or this afternoon or whatever time it is where you're logging in from. Wanted to, every year we do this webinar, and it's to introduce prospective applicants to the New Normal program. And it's been extremely successful the last few years. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk to applicants for this year's program in the same manner. So here's the our sort of plan. It was quite simple. I'll sort of describe a little bit about the program for 20 minutes, half hour or so. Talk to you about the schedule, the curricular structure, and so forth. And then in the chat message on the side, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have that I didn't touch on to your satisfaction in my remarks. Big picture things, more detailed things, whatever is most relevant for you. So first of all, however, I'd like to sort of take a step back and speak a little bit to the real more fundamental questions that we are not hoping to answer, but to grapple with in this program, and particularly those that are those are particularly relevant to this third and final year of the New Normal postgraduate program. And it should, I think, set the stage a bit for the more fruitful conversation. First of all, I've got some notes here. One of the things that when we started the program 2 years ago, we were really eager to try to develop in a novel way, was how it is that design, and particularly design education, and particularly design education in relationship to the city, could take a longer-term view of how design might intervene in pressing questions. That there's a particular cycle that the clientele model within design, within architecture in particular, focuses on, which is a relatively short time span for an understanding for the real design of the city. And so the question of temporality, futurity, historicity are ones that we're extremely interested in, but ones that we try to formulate less in terms of, let's say, less in terms of cycles of generational time, and more from a more sort of first principles understanding that the cities that we've inherited, that constitute the real core of the global network of cities and megacities that increasingly comes to the fore in any understanding of global governance and global society, are ones that are much older than any one particular political system, economic system, cultural system, and that by starting with a sort of premise that the design needs to be intervening at this much longer scale and duration within the city, we can hopefully reframe some of the more pressing questions that we face in a new way, and in a way that will provide for more durable and more ultimately more effective design interventions. This is a bit of a broad statement, so let me dive in a bit on this as well. One of the things that our program is known for. Let me step a bit closer just for the audio. One of the things that our program is known for is an interest in the social, economic, cultural, and ecological impacts and let's say capacities of emerging technologies, particularly planetary scale computational technologies, of which there are several that I elucidated in the book, The Stack. Now, one thing we assume, sort of as a given, that the ways in which our society at this moment might understand what these technologies are good for, how they might be applied, is a really different kind of understanding of what they are, of these technologies, rather than what they maybe more essentially are, or what they could do. And so the way in which I suppose we try to sort of frame this is not so much, is both what if, what are the ways in which we could, these kinds of technologies, and ultimately the socio-technical systems that are bound up with these technologies, how could they work in a different way? But also, let's say, how else, how differently might the present situation be? And so this speculative appetite is at the foundation of a lot of what we do. It motivates and I suppose it inspires the kind of thinking that we do. And it really starts, again, with this basic sort of nagging feeling that we don't necessarily, that we have, the planetary scale computational technologies have provided us with tremendous technical capacity, but that we don't have, we have barely an understanding of how it is that these may be used to properly support the kinds of social and ecological systems that we really need, and that the misrecognition of the real function is a tremendous problem. Now, this is also to say, though, that the question of critique and challenging and contesting and troubling a current reality is an obvious sort of important step, but it's not really enough, because we also realize that, and this is something that we talked quite a bit about in the event that we did earlier this summer in Moscow with Mark Wigley and Beatrice Colomina, we have always been post-human, that in many cases, the things that the technologies are challenging are fundamental assumptions on our part that may turn out to be not so true after all. So what I mean is that one of the things that emerging technologies and complex and advanced technologies do is, of course, allow us to have the technical capacity to do lots of things we've never done before, but perhaps more importantly, they reveal things that have always been true that we didn't recognize as such. And so, for example, the example I've used is that a microscope doesn't cause microbes, but once we know those microbes are there, we never see surfaces the same way again. And we think that other kinds of technologies, more like artificial intelligence, robotics, synthetic biology, certainly astronomy, are also are technologies that shift our understanding of what ultimately of what it means to be human, and how it is that we understand human settlement, human history, and how it is that we sort of can revise and reframe what our real design project really is. And so there's a few sort of bigger picture sweeping remarks to introduce some of our discussion here as well. What we call this in the program, these kinds of shifts where a technology reveals something that was always there, but we were unable to recognize. We call these Copernican shifts. Copernican shifts, of course, being an astronaut, are ones in which there's some way in which the human we understand ourselves as being the center of the story. and that technologies reveal ways in one way or another that we're not the center of the story, whether we're not astronomically the center of the story, or Darwinian biology shows how we're sort of part of we're one part of a beautiful and dynamic ongoing process. And AI, one of the things that AI does, for example, as well, is to show us that thinking operates in a lot of different ways, that intelligence is an emergent property of matter that already exists in the world in many diverse forms, and that our particular version of this is merely one cycle among many. Okay, now, all of which is to say is that I think one of the things that we have discovered over the course of the 2 years of the program, and I'll say that the new normal program, now I'll step back and talk a little bit about the structure of the program. The new normal program is set up as a kind of combination of a postgraduate educational program, extremely intense, compressed postgraduate program, and a collaborative think tank, a research platform for the faculty and for the participants in the program, who we refer to as researchers. And one of the things that I think we've discovered over the course of the 2 years so far of working together is the need for the development of what, based on what I've indicated, a kind of post-Copernican turn, a Copernican turn in design. That what we had in the late 20th century had become a reasonable goal of what we call human-centered design has been raised to that had been raised to a kind of almost a kind of metaphysics within design theory, that of course, if you design all systems around how it is that human users would be comforted by those systems, that's a good thing. And in many cases it is, and in other cases it's also how we arrive at tremendously difficult to solve ecological problems, political problems, economic and otherwise. And it turns out that designing systems around ways in which humans think those systems should work is not always the best question. Now, this may not always the best path forward. Now, this may seem in some ways sort of counterintuitive, and it is, but it's one that we can, I think, is an important line of development. It certainly has been for us. Okay, now structure of the program, very nuts and bolts. Here's what's going to happen. So the program runs February through the end of June every year. It is, as I said, extremely intense. It's really 24/7 for the most part. As some of the alumni of previous program have indicated, it sort of feels like we've compressed a year and a half program into 5 months. It's maybe not quite that, but it's similar to that as well. It's extremely dense and rich curriculum. But let me give you a little bit of sense of the shape of it. There are 30 researchers in the program, sometimes 32, depending on how it sort of works. And they are admitted from an extremely wide range of backgrounds. We don't have a sort of ideal new normal participant. We try to have a real, I think it's more like casting a play and less like cloning our ideal researcher. There are 32 participants, but half of them are from Russia and CIS countries. Half of them are international. And those international students come really from all over the world, primarily Europe, Eastern and Western Europe, but also we've had every year we've had students from South America, from Southeast Asia, Northern Asia, even United States, and actually lots of the United States. I joked. Half of the students have a architecture or urbanism background of some sort. Half of them have anything else, and so we have researchers who are philosophers, who are artists, who are programmers. We have a lot we draw in a lot of researchers from computer science or other coding and programming based backgrounds, economists, journalists, political scientists, and The reason that we do this, the reason that we do it this way, which is extremely unusual for a program that is focusing on urban design, is that we feel that at this point in time, especially, but probably for a long time, the question of what is the urban and how it is that a design imaginary, and particularly this post-Copernican design imaginary, may intervene and engage with the cities that we have, with an understanding of the cities to come, the cities that we need, can enter into this question at this point from many, many different points, many different points. Particularly, increasingly these days, from sides that are looking at not only the physical sort of atomic structure of the cities, but also increasingly the ways in which software and digital systems exist both in the city as kind of part of the building fabric of the city itself, but also at platform scale in how it is that the inhabitants of the city come to use the city, and or the governance of the city develops the model of the city that in turn becomes the medium for that governance. Now, the point of this really is that, and this is a key point, the real goal or the outcome of the program as we see it are certainly projects, and the projects that have developed in the first 2 years of the program have all gone on to take on a life of their own. They've all gone on to be published, to be exhibited for film festivals, to be developed as software platforms, so forth and so on. They've all been extremely successful, but really the goal of the program is to provide a model for a different kind of urban design practice. To the outcome of the program are new practices. And the kind of urban design practice that we want to model, that we want to produce, are ones that are much more interdisciplinary, that start from the premise that the distribution of boxes and envelopes within the city and the organization of software-based systems that might support the engagement or distribution or zoning logic or programmatic logic of that physical distribution are not two different questions. They are in fact a combined design problematic, and ones that the urban design practices of the coming decades need to have deep facility on both sides of this equation. And so we bring interdisciplinary teams together. And in this, I think one of the things that we've seen, which has been extremely successful, is that many people who come from a different disciplinary background than architectural urbanism are able to, in essence, rotate what may, let's say, economics, or rotate what begins as an analytic discipline, an analytic intelligence, and rotate that into a projective intelligence, or basically economics becomes a design. It becomes a design discipline. Political science becomes a design discipline. Philosophy becomes a design discipline. It's how you describe and analyze now has the freedom or the platform or the permission to in fact propose and test and prototype and test its hypotheses in different ways, and that's been extremely successful. I'm going to pull up the calendar here. The program is structured in a series of modules. Now, so in the 5-month structure, everyone is in the same track going forward. It's not a multi-track system. So in many cases, you may be familiar with other design programs where you have a group of students who are divided into studios, and there may be 3 parallel studio tracks. This is a single track structure. Everyone is working together. And for the most part, before everyone is divided into groups, everyone will have worked with everyone else at some point. This is certainly a goal. And so the structures of the modules facilitate that. Most of them, again, beginning in February, going through June, most of the modules are roughly, some of them are as short as 2 days, some of them are as long as a week, but they're short, intensive modules. They're mixed between seminar-based learning and active, hands-on charrettes, where you are making something, making proposals, oftentimes digital, cinematic sort of forms, in response to the ideas that are being discussed. And in this, and so by the time the groups are divided up, each one will have done, perhaps a dozen or more of these super intense kind of charrettes. And so how it is that something needs to be said, what the content of the project needs to be, it is honed over and over and over and over. That by the time the project begins, there's a real sense of what it needs to be. So let me go through very quickly the schedule, the rough schedule. Some of this we're always adding. We always add new faculty as we sort of bring in both in terms of there's a few people we'd like to sort of add to the mix each year, and we're trying to finally confirm their 100% confirm their participation. So I won't speak to those people, but the ones we are 100% confirmed with, I'll speak to now. And we also add a few as we go forward, because every group is a little bit different, and some of the needs of those are a little bit different. There's also tons and tons of guest lectures, but the main structure. So I always begin the program with a week-long seminar that lays out the core research themes for the year, which I'm going to do after this discussion of the curriculum. I'll tell you a little bit about what some of those additional research themes are for year three. And that's a sort of what ends up being 5 all-day seminars during this first week, which we really sort of try to develop the language, the conceptual vocabulary, the glossary, the framework for the kind of work that we want to do, and to seed this lay of the land. Following this, we do a workshop with the Mexican-German artist Julieta Aranda, who you may know as the editor of eFlux, who does a kind of a workshop with the students that is more from a sort of studio arts perspective, but in our context works as a way to try to develop those kinds of speculative and creative muscles beyond the limited framework of applied design. We then have a seminar with Etienne Turpin and Paul Feigenfeld we began last year, whose work in relationship to questions of art and architecture in the Anthropocene, the geopolitics of data, and particularly how these two combine in relationship to specifically urban questions. This year we'll also then be joined by Jeff Mena, who a writer, author you may know from Building Blog. And Jeff is, I think, a really, really interesting architectural writer and critic, particularly dealing with questions of infrastructure and the kinds of, extreme sort of hidden systems within a city that may be really how everything sort of make everything work at a scale that may be too big or too small for us to perceive, the kinds of things that architecture generally avoids because it's not what we're looking at. Jeff's work is really essential in learning how to see urban systems in relationship to how they really work, as opposed to how they appear to us. So it's a seminar in the backstage. We'll be joined this year by Suhail Malik, who runs the master's program, the MA Fine Arts program degree at Goldsmiths in London. Suhail is extremely interesting theorist as well, particularly in relationship to questions of finance, value, ontologies of value, and so on, and how these relate to and engage particularly with the problems of futurity, and how the financial models of time can structure these problems of futurity in this as well. Beginning to see how these sort of move together. We're going to have then a workshop with Anastasia Smirnova, a Russian and Dutch architect who taught at Strelka for quite some time, and we're going to be trying to engage really sort of closely and deeply with some of the Russian historical and architectural context. We then have visit from Metahaven. Daniel van der Velden and Vinke Krok, who've been core faculty part of the program from the very beginning, will be coming for a seminar, not a design studio, but a seminar at the beginning of this as well. And if any of you happen to be in London, you should definitely go to the ICA and see their new show, or in Amsterdam to the Stedelijk Museum there as well. It's a kind of master performance by them, this exhibition. Now, we then go on a trip. There's 2 trips within the program. The first trip is within Russia, and this is usually connected to a longer-term research initiative that we've developed around questions of the Arctic. And the development of the Arctic and the geopolitical position of the Arctic within Russia. And one way to think about this, if you imagine the Earth from the top down, looking down at the North Pole, is as the polar ice cap begins to break apart and move around and so forth in relationship in response to climatic pressures, the boundaries and coast of this sea become clearer, and in fact become more strongly contested and more deeply invested. But they're ones that cross a number of different national territories. So Russia, Norway, Canada, in particular Greenland through Denmark are key players in this as well. And so Liam Young, who runs the Fiction and Entertainment MA at SCIARC, and you probably also know his earlier work at AA, takes the students on a trip to a location. We haven't pinned down the one that this year. The first year they went to they've gone to the far north and the far east towards Siberia with this as well. So get it out of Moscow and out into a location unlike anywhere you've ever been before. We then have a workshop where we're working with, and this trip is usually like capturing a lot of footage. And we work with Nathan Su, who's close collaborator with Liam on cinematic workflow processes. So if you've never shot anything before, you're good. If you're an expert at this, you'll learn a lot as well. So I'm going to go a little bit quicker just so we'll get through the whole thing. We have time for questions. Next is a seminar with Keller Easterling from Yale. And Keller's work, as you know, is extraordinarily interesting on questions of let's say, post-normal forms of jurisdiction, special economic zones and so forth, that have in fact become new norms for urban design, where the exception in fact becomes the rule, the political, economic, and cultural impacts of this kind of patchwork of political exception. Robert Petrushko will be joining us this year from Harvard Graduate School of Design. Robert teaches the data science and data visualization courses at Harvard. You've probably seen his work quite a bit if you were at the Venice Biennale this year, or familiar with the panoramic visualizations that he's done in collaboration with Dylan Scafidio and Laura Kurgan. Robert builds a lot of those, builds those things. Really fantastic guy, and we're very glad to have him. We're very glad to have him this year as well. Lev Manovich will be joining us the next week. After this, we'll be doing a seminar that draws on his sort of complete understanding of particularly the relationship between Russian avant-garde and the development of what we now understand as a kind of data-driven or data science view of culture. Gene Kogan will then be joining us for a workshop on machine vision, where Gene does these really fantastic workshops where you break apart these black box of machine vision tools and begin to develop procedures and processes in this as well. And I should say then, in this transition from the more theoretical workshops into the more technical ones, the way we see this really is that by putting these so closely together, that the boundary between what's a theoretical investigation and what's a technical investigation becomes much more entangled. How it is that we might understand these roles of emerging technology at a theoretical level becomes engaged directly with a kind of hands-on working with them as well. And of course, these technologies show up quite a bit in the final projects as well. We'll then be doing a workshop, which is also new this year, we're very excited about, in collaboration with Strelka KB. Strelka KB, the Institute as a whole, is a number of different sort of sister organizations, I suppose. Strelka KB is the architecture and urban design studio that is part of the institute, and it's one of the key funders of the postgraduate program. We're working with Dennis Svetov of Strelka KB, and we've got a number of projects in mind that are of real overlapped interest with us as well, particularly around issues of urban automation, and particularly on issues of special political and economic zones. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that going forward. Now, next we've been doing an ongoing project with Google around urban scale AI, or AI at urban scale. And this is something that we've developed in the first year. Something that began in the second year and will be growing a lot for the second year. And so what we have is a number of researchers from a Google research group called Cerebra, which is, and inside of that is another group called Artists of Machine Intelligence, who you may be familiar with from the ones who developed the Deep Dream images. And so a number of those researchers from Google who are interested in how it is that we can decentralize AI and develop AI at the edges as an urban strategy, will be coming to Moscow, and we'll be working with them directly. We'll also be, as part of this workshop as well, we'll be as we did last year, we'll be working with another friend of core New Normal personality named Ben Cerveny, who was originally one of the founders of Flickr and Stamen Design and other things, and now runs an extremely interesting nonprofit called the Foundation for Public Code, maybe kind of inverse of some of Google's economic models. That's interested in how it is you develop the urban governance. Governments would develop public versions of the large-scale urban informatics systems, and based on an understanding that these kinds of technologies are not just something that urban governments need to be able to understand or license or pay private companies to develop. They increasingly are really the core, should be the core competencies of urban governing systems, the public forms of this. Okay, we then take our international field trip. This is super jam-packed. We then take our international field trip. This year we're going to Japan. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we'll be doing and the reason we'll be going there in Japan in terms of this question of what we call the inverse uncanny valley and the human exceptional zones. But let me get to that. When we're there. So that's a 10-day field trip to Japan. Obviously, this is all paid. Now, one of the things that I should mention, as I should have said a little bit earlier on, this program is tuition free. There's no cost to participate in the New Normal program. In fact, we pay the researchers a small stipend to cover housing costs and stuff like this. So you don't have to worry about any kind of financial issues while you're a member of the program. And this is of course inclusive of the trips. So the trips to the Arctic and Siberia and the trips to Japan are all paid for as part of the program. And the reason for this is really simple, is that we want to be able to admit the researchers that the program would benefit from the most and that would benefit most from the program. And we're fortunate to have, in terms of relationship with the rest of the Institute, to have the ability to do so. But it has also allowed us to put together in the first few years an extremely interesting and rich and diverse cohorts that would have been very difficult or not impossible to do under other kinds of circumstances. So if that's a concern in terms of how all of this, how you pay for this, should not be a concern. This is this is absolutely needs blind in this regard. Okay, now back from the field trip. We then, at this point, everyone will be divided into groups. We do this organization of the groups based on watching everyone work together over the course of these first 3.5 and 4 months. See who are working well together, see if it mix, and we put together usually 7 groups of 4, roughly. And those 7 groups of 4 we try to develop is quite interdisciplinary. So there's someone who's really good writer, really good filmmaker, really good architectural modeling, so on and so on, so that any group ultimately can do anything they want. That the skill base, the conceptual base, the technical skills, all of it, that each one of these 4 groups is capable of developing a project that can go whatever direction their ideas go in, because that team has that full stack capacity, and that's worked extremely well. At that point, we then bring in Dunn and Raby, Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby, now at Parsons New School in New York, but well known for their work at the RCA in London. Sort of foundational figures in one particular mode of kind of genre of what has been called speculative design. Among the best sort of project critics we could hope to have. And we're very happy to have them back. This year. A second wave of critics will then come in as these have been formulated together, and this new this year is Mark Wigley and Beatrice Colomina. Mark Wigley is professor of architecture at Columbia, formerly the dean there. Beatrice Colomina, architectural historian from Princeton. Together, they were also authors of this extraordinarily important little yellow book called "Are We Human?" Curators of the Istanbul Biennial a few years ago, and again among the best critics we could have. Now, then we have Liam Young will be coming back and teaching a longer studio with us for the week. I'll then be I'll be returning. I'm there again for I come for three extended periods throughout the time. Back for the rest of the month, and really the rest, and then Metahaven comes as well. Metahaven comes back. We do another studio and crits with them as well. And for this last 6 weeks, it's project development. And so it's project development, and super intensive project development. We're bringing different critics in to try to tweak this around. The end of June 20th and 21st is our 10th date. We do a big final presentation in the courtyard at Strelka. Which is, if you don't know from Moscow, the Strelka campus is one of the real cultural hubs of the city. During the summer, has events pretty much every night, drawing hundreds and hundreds of people every night, and it's a real, it's a tremendous social resource within the city, and this is the platform for this as well. Okay, so that's the overview. That's basically that's 5 months. It's a extremely compressed. Extremely compressed curriculum, but it's been incredibly effective. And I think that, I did a talk at Penn, University of Pennsylvania, a few weeks ago, and one of the things I was talking about was the program that we have here, and was listing out this faculty, and they were saying this is the best design faculty in any program in any program going right now, and I think that in many ways it really is, at least for the kind of design that we're interested in doing. I also, and that's compared to anyone. I mean, I should also, and everyone is coming because they really want to be part of this program. All these people have, their main job, and they come to Moscow to be part of this program because of the researchers, because of the research agenda. They invest a huge amount of time in preparing for this. Their engagement with the program is extremely strong. You have really close, deep, meaningful access to these faculty, and because of this, the program is really it's an important part of the research that this faculty develop over the course of the year. And it ends up being, I think, a genuinely transformative educational experience for everyone, not only the researchers, but certainly for me, and for the faculty as well. And so I hate this word community because I find it to be there for a lot of different reasons, but I think there really is this kind of like a genuine, in the best sense of the word, there's a genuine community that gets developed in relationship to over the course of this the curriculum, and certainly afterwards too. Our alumni continue to work together, found projects together, found the trust space in Berlin, for example. The projects go on to other kinds of things as well, and so as a platform for people come, it becomes a kind of inflection point in their career, taking them in a somewhat different direction. It's been extremely successful, and it's very gratifying as putting the program together for that to be the case. Okay, last point, and then I'm going to go very quickly through this, and then I'm happy to stay on as long as we need for questions. I want to talk about a couple of the new themes this year. One is, and we could go into much greater detail on each of these things, but I kind of want to shift to the questions as quickly as we can. But three of the, and the verbiage and the sort of the more outline of this is on the newnormal.strelka.com website, which you should know, which is where you go for all of the application and all the rest of it. There you go. Algorithmic governance. One of the things that came out of the research that we finished up with last year were a lot of projects that were dealing in extremely novel and unusual kinds of ways with the questions of how algorithmic governance might operate at the urban scale, particularly in relationships to models, simulations, and how model simulations come to take on a life of our own. But these questions are not only technical; they are political, they're geopolitical, they are economic and ecological as well. And we are, on the one hand, extremely critical and dissatisfied with the typical smart city kind of discourse, which is sort of like the cities will work in an extremely standardized kind of way based on everything that we know, and we kind of just automate that standardization. We see that the ultimate developments of planetary scale computation at the urban scale or at the city layer is one that will almost inevitably and for ways that are both good and bad, will transform the fundamental zoning logics of urban economies, work, play, entertainment, manufacturing, so forth and so on. And that this resorting is already happening. This isn't science fiction, but the question of how the models that we generate around these kinds of transformations in turn become governing tools is something we don't have the proper vocabulary for. We don't have even the right jurisdictional framework, perhaps, to even understand where and how this needs to play out. And it's one that we are attempting to test and prototype in earnest. Second, what we call the inverse uncanny valley. And this goes to a lot of what I was talking before in relationship to the Copernican shift in design and how it is that new technologies reveal things about a situation that may have always been there, but were less visible, less easy to see. So an uncanny valley, as you probably know, is the effect by which you perceive something that is not quite human-like enough. And because of this, it appears somewhat grotesque or unsettling. The inverse uncanny valley, however, is the process by which we see ourselves from the outside. We see ourselves from the eyes of this, from machine vision or AI or some kind of, in this case, machinic other. And what we see, when we see ourselves, we are unsettled by this strange, not quite human-like thing that we see. We're the thing that we find disturbing. By seeing ourselves not as we imagine ourselves to be, not as we recognize ourselves to be, but in fact, perhaps as we actually are. And this deep moment of demystification, this moment of actual recognition of something that is fundamentally there is extremely important, both on almost just at a psychological level and really understanding how it is that we need to think about encounters with AI and everyday robotics at an urban scale, and how to get around and negotiate and understand what the anthropomorphic and anthropocentric tendencies to, as a sort of default to understand goals for AI and robotics should be, and more importantly, probably what they should not be. So third and last, and then we will open it up to discussion, is human exclusion zone. So one of the things that we note, and this came up a little bit with the discussion with Rem Koolhaas and the end of the first year at the final event, is is that from factory floors in which you've got a segmentation of humans over here and robots over there with a cage in between, to the plans for automated vehicles within cities that would, for liability and safety and insurance reasons, would strongly separate humans and autonomous vehicles into different zones and domains, to the automated agricultural regions at the perimeter of cities, which are largely robotically manned and operated. There's a new kind of, and you can find other kinds of examples of this, small, medium, and large. There's a new kind of strange territorial topology that has been developed that is based not on the integration and intermingling of humans and robotics and humans and technology, but on their programmatic separation. What are called human exclusion zones. And at a much larger scale, and we're interested in really what this means around to this question of how it is that automation in particular is restructuring and rezoning the city in different ways. And at the largest possible scale, we look at ways in which what science fiction author Bruce Sterling calls involuntary parks, which are much larger scale territories that for one way or another are now no longer or cannot be human inhabited. Think places like Chernobyl or Fukushima. And we'll be visiting Fukushima on the Japan trip, as well. Okay, so let me stop there. I'd like to then, as long as answer any questions that anyone might have, you can just post them into the chat window here, and we'll try to get them into, assuming that chat window is available to you, and we'll go from there and try to get through as many as we can with the time that's allowed as well. So I'm happy to open it up and speak to anything you want. So just go ahead and type away. And while you're considering these, and we just confirm with Vlad that we don't have that there isn't a technical issue on the typing part. Is the application deadline is approaching. But I guess what I want to sort of emphasize here in terms of this is something I said a little bit earlier, that we really don't have a single type of student that we're looking for. We want students that are genuinely curious about the work that we're doing, to have something interesting and original to contribute to the discussion and to the projects and to the development. We're looking for people who, as I say, are perhaps at a point in their career where they feel the most appropriate thing for them would be at this time, this kind of inflection point of a slight deliberate fork in the road. Maybe they come back. We have a number of researchers from previous years who, for example, were working in a major architectural offices. They took the 5 months, came to work in the program, and took everything back with them to that office and came back and began working as well. So we find that the 5 months is a kind of ideal length of time, that it's long enough that we can dive deep and to do rich discussion and development, and not so long that your life isn't there when it's done. Your life is still there when it goes then as well. So just on the group chat here, to make sure I understand, on the Hangouts window, you should be able to go up to the top left and click on the little blue dialogue thing, and your chat window will pop up here as well. So I'm hoping there's no technical issue that's preventing any of our discussion, but I certainly would be. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what we'll be doing. At this website here, thenewnormal.strelka.com, you'll be able to see, one of the things I would also recommend that you spend a fair bit of time doing is going through the projects that we developed from previous years. Because we see this program really as a kind of cumulative process in terms of the research thread. Every year starts from scratch in terms of the people, in terms of the goals, in terms of the kind of dynamic that we're working on. But at the same time, there's also a little bit of a kind of cumulative logic to this as well. And all I mean this only to say is, if you're curious about what kind of let's see. Okay, a question from the chat window. Okay, but I'm not seeing the questions here. So Vlad is pasting to me. So this is helpful. I'll get to these as well. If you want interesting, what are the kinds of design program? What are the kinds of projects that you're likely to work on, and what are the kinds of things you'd like to do? Look at the outcomes from the previous years, and you'll get a much clearer sense of the range and diversity of some of the projects than I could explain in the actual form. Okay, so let me answer the questions from the chat. Is it fair to say that the whole program is more abstract and speculative than applied engineering? Depends on so I think what your frame of reference is. I would say that we have a lot of people from engineering backgrounds have been part of the program. We had physicists who had worked at CERN, physicist who worked at CERN was in the program from last year. We have a number of people with computer science backgrounds, a lot of people with programming backgrounds, and so on, who are interested in, developing, in applying these skills and technologies to forms of project exploration that are more speculative, that are less about solving a well-understood problem than about starting with something we think we understand and exploring the space of possibilities that can be developed with this. So we see the technologies and the engineering technologies as part of the process of speculation. That the speculative part is not only something that happens with words, it's also something that happens with tools. And at the end of the day, we are interested in landing these speculations into something that's not an art project as such, that really is something that I think one of the ways we should see is that a lot of the things that we were particularly working on the first year, which may have seemed extremely speculative and conjectural and even science fiction, are now things that seem kind of obvious or let's say no longer science fiction, that are part of the everyday landscape or just over the horizon. And so I think part of the process of the speculation is not just this question of sort of creativity for its own sake, but to working in relationship to real social, cultural, and economic limit conditions, and trying to develop and prototype alternatives in relationship to this. And my strong belief is that works better in relationship to constraints than it does a kind of a blank page. So I hope that answers the question. Social sciences looks to meaningfully contribute to today's and future issues, often through a critical approach. How is a heavily critical background valued in the application process? It is quite valued a lot. Again, there isn't a single type of applicant we're looking for. I mean, we will have successful applicants who have a very strong technical background and haven't read a book of philosophy in 10 years. We have successful applicants who are philosophy faculty who have never opened a command line in 10 years. And we find a way to actually have them collaborate and to work together in ways that would work for this as well. My PhD was in the social sciences, and I find that we are extremely interested in different kinds of, particularly economics, sociology, political science, as not only providing analytic and interpretive frameworks that are necessary to actually understand the conditions by which design might operate, but also to take these ways of thinking and leverage them into design disciplines. So economics is relatively comfortable with this with things like mechanism design, where it will design a market or design a system based on economic principles. Fantastic. Political science, a little bit less so. Sociology, a little bit less so. But in our program, these in fact become design disciplines, or they become disciplines that have value both for the analytic and projective capacities as well. So I would say that they have that this critical background perspective is one of the profiles that we are looking for. What level of skill sets and mindsets are you expecting from the prospective architects, planners who will internationally apply from the cohort? The kind of mindset that we're looking for. We're looking for people who. Let me put it this way. I would say that the successful the architecture, international architecture applicant pool is always very strong, but we take people from a really wide range of backgrounds. We don't, and I'll say this again, with the applicant process, we really don't, I mean, some schools will basically take all of the applicants, sort of rank them 1 to 100, like a league table, and then make a cutoff point, and we take everything above that. That's not what we do. We take students, we admit students who on paper might not look as strong as someone else because we think they're a better fit for the program. And the types of things that make someone sort of a better fit are someone who feels that the way in which their skills are being applied, and the ways in which their ideas are being applied in the current context of their work isn't good enough. That they want to invest their time and want to invest their thinking, invest their energy in the conception of a new kind of way for design to work, a new kind of design practice, a new kind of interest. In other words, for the architects, we're interested in people who feel that architecture as a way of thinking, as a way of representing, as a way of making, as a way of seeing and interpreting space and temporal systems as well, it has a tremendous amount to contribute to the question of the kinds of worlds we want to make, but that it's being the potential of that contribution is being frustrated by the status quo, that it's not able to have the impact that it in fact should have. We want people who are extremely curious. We want people who, generally, I should also say is that applicants are not, it's not about sort of bringing a project to the program and saying, okay, here's the project that I want to do in the program. We discover the projects as we go along. I can't tell you right now what the final projects are going to be because we haven't done the work to lead up to understanding how they want to go. We need architects who can invent the brief, not just respond to the brief. Is probably the most direct and efficient answer to the question. Okay, what technical skills would you say are important to have for applying? I think as much as you can, but it's in different ways. Writing is a technical skill as much as anything else. We have successful applicants to the program who have almost no technical skills, who really are other than writing or anything else. We have others applicants to the program who are extremely advanced. And again, in this, you got to think of it a little bit the way we put together the cohort, a little bit like you would put together an office. You don't want all writers or all programmers or all 3D modelers. You need some of each in order to actually develop a project from beginning to end. And so some of the areas in terms of the technical things that we have been looking for having to do with, again, some of the machine vision systems are extremely important. This is development. Basic application development has been extremely important. Data visualization skills have been extremely important. Large-scale data modeling skills are important. But none of these are more important than, say, video editing, video compositing, and so forth. And so those things, those kinds of cinematic skills are also ones that we definitely look for in this as well. But again, it's like putting together, think of it sort of the way in which you would put together an office or put together a workflow. You need a number of people all along the lines with different skills. It's not all one thing. Comment box. Okay, so could you please tell us a bit more about the Fukushima site visiting? What question will be researching over there, and what will be the main focus? Sure. The thing that we'll be looking at there in particular is, as I mentioned, I think the most important thing we're looking at is looking at it as a kind of example of what we've seen and called the human exclusion zone. That these are sites where, in the case of Fukushima, because of the tsunami and then the leak of radioactive water in the area, has become largely uninhabited. Though people are moving back, there's sort of actually three. I mean, there's different ways of doing it, but essentially three different human zones. Of a core zone is completely excluded, and all the way to sort of an outer zone that people are actually moving back into with this as well. And so with the scalar typologies of the human exclusion zone, from the very small, like within a factory, all the way up to these large-scale ecological territories, we're trying to sort of build a map and gather these examples or case studies of this larger typology in such a way that we can try to see lines of connection between them. Like, what do they have in common? How do they sort of work? And then this gets folded back into the way in which we'll be researching on the ways in which part of the impact of automation at the city scale is creating this rezoning structures within the urban systems itself. The second aspect of the Fukushima that we're really interested in has to do with the question of risk. One of the things that had come out of the discussions last year a lot was the way in which risk modeling, and think of it like insurance, risk modeling is one of the ways in which models of the future have come to govern the present. That by modeling risk in a particular way about the future, there's a way of reshaping and restructuring the price signals, the cost structure, and the economics, among other qualities, the legal structures of different kinds of systemic design capacities in the present. And so we had one project called Standard Deviation that was interested in how modeling risk in a certain way, how design to get upstream in this systems design process to develop its different kinds of facilities with modeling risk in different ways that were more attentive to, for example, ecological externalities and so forth. Now, with Fukushima, the question of risk is one that comes front and center for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the sort of the perception of risk of going there in the first place, even though for the most part, you depending on how you count it and depending on where you go and how long you're there, the flight from Moscow to Tokyo will expose you to more radiation than perhaps the visit itself, depending how long you stay there. But there's another way to perceive it. I think the first person who is sort of officially, the first person died of radiation from the Fukushima fallout was sort of confirmed rather recently. Now, many people died from the tsunami and the evacuation and the rest of this as well, but it's not how we perceive it. And so this question of perception of risk and the reality of the risk is also something we want to kind of use this this visit as a way to think about rather more seriously, more deeply. Well, particularly in relationship to other kinds of ecological risks that we undermodel and underestimate. How does the program of the third year fit into, or in this case, complete the 3-year cycle of the new normal program? Well, we conceptualized the program as a 3-year cycle from the beginning, and part of the rationale for this was to ensure that this tremendous faculty that we're bringing to bear would, sort of put down some roots and invest their interest in a longer-term project that would be based on this engagement with the Russian context. So we see this as I don't know how conclusive we'll be able to be in terms of concluding the 3-year cycle of the research will have concluded. I don't know that we will have solved, these fundamental issues that we started with, the issues of speculative megastructure and synthetic sensing and inverse uncanny valley, that by June we'll have them all figured out. But we do see them as part of as part of a whole. And so, for example, we'll be publishing an enormous, it's going to be rather enormous book called The New Normal, which will be cataloging all of the research that we've done in the first, second, and third year. And we will see how all the parts fit together. It's clear that as you look at all the material that we've developed, that it's not just there's the first year and that's discrete, second year that's discrete, third year, that would be discrete, but rather that there's lines of connection between them as well. We also have lines of connection between the we realized that what we discovered was not in order. It wasn't in chronological order, and there's a degree of reflection that's necessary to understand, in fact, how this has worked. But as just to say is also that the communities of the students, again, sorry for this word, of the first and second years have really sort of come together and provide in this sort of way, and we are looking to bring another group into that mix as well. And so I would see it as in a way, in certain ways, which would have to go into much more detail on, as a really discrete thing. In other words, you do what you need to do. We come to the program, we have the conversations that we have, the seminars develop in the way that they develop, and the work that we do, which will come out of the third year program in June, will surprise all of us. Won't be what we really necessarily anticipated in some ways. Some ways it may be, in some ways it'll be like, okay, this is the direction we want to go. But we have each year for this to work, and for the way it has worked, is there's a tremendous degree of the kind of freedom of the laboratory to go where the research leads us. So that remains the case for sure. Okay, so also I should say that Nikolai Boyshev, who's the tutor in the program, and really a very important co-faculty member in the program, someone with whom I developed the program, that Olga Tanisheva and I developed the program, and running the program, will also be doing an administrative seminar about the application process, which will be dealing with issues, more nitty-gritty issues like portfolios, what kind of portfolios are, and in general, I should say, and that's going to be on Tuesday, October 16th. Tuesday, October 16th. Nikolai will be doing that seminar, so please follow along with that. Portfolios, you should develop the portfolio based on the work that you really do. So if you're an economist, don't try to draw buildings for us. Send us your best papers. We can handle it. If you're a journalist, send us the pieces that you've done. Send us the work that really represents the best of the work that you've done, of who you are, and help us see how you see this work leveraged and rotated into something that can engage with these kinds of research questions. We want to see it in that way, and we'll follow along with you. And so for architects and urbanists, the question of portfolio may be a little bit simpler. Someone from the other disciplines, it's sometimes a different issue. But if you're saying, can I send, I wrote these articles, can I send you that? Yes, that's what we want. So Tuesday, October 16th with Nikolai. How would visual artists, non-applied arts fit into the program? So we have had several, studio artists in the program, and we are really interested in, all people are different. All artists have a different relationship to collaboration, have a different relationship to these issues, but I teach in my main professorship at the University of California, San Diego is in the visual arts program. Visual arts here at the UC system is part of a research university, so it's a little bit different than a standalone art school, in that arts are taken as something that is contributing to a set of disciplinary research agendas. It's not a side thing that happens over here, but it's something that's actually generative of, original knowledge that has applications to other parts of other parts of an intellectual culture. We certainly believe that. We certainly believe that at Strelka as well. And so, just like I would say and whether regardless of the disciplinary background, for architect or political scientist or filmmaker, to the extent to which you see these as a perspective, as a set of expertise, as a disciplinary background, as a way of thinking and a way of working that you want to bring to the table to develop something, a bit larger than yourself. Art, absolutely, it would count among these. Then, by all means, we certainly welcome artists, people who have a studio arts background in that regard. I will say though that it's not a residency. It's not a circumstance in which you would come and sort of and develop standalone projects. Everything is done as collaborative projects, but you're collaborating with a number of different people, which I think for a lot of artists is really exciting. That it's a chance in a way to sort of step out of what can sometimes be an overly insular art bubble. Every discipline's bubbles. Arts bubbles can be thicker bubbles. Step out of arts bubble and engage with people from disciplinary backgrounds on kinds of projects that maybe you haven't worked on before. And even if you go back to an artistic practice, fantastic. You will have a different way. You may have different ways of working, different ways of conceptualizing and framing some of these issues that will be extremely valuable. Certainly would be our hope. How living in Russia and the context that it provides support or relate to the new normal. So there's probably two questions, both the context of the research that is focused on Russia and the living in Russia, which is of course different for international students and than it is for Russians. This program is really focused on the Russian context as much as it's really possible to do within the constraints of a 5-month program. Each year, we try to find new ways to introduce the extremely rich and complex context of Russian history, Russian urbanism, Moscow in particular as a place to be working, but also the entire 11 time zones of Eurasia. The question of the Eurasian context more broadly was a bigger question we were dealing with last year, both in terms of Sino-Russian relations and the shifts within former Soviet Eurasian countries in the South. And so the Russian context is extremely important. The projects that we develop are all meant to be, some of them are really deeply rooted and situated within a Russian site condition. Other ones are ones that are directly informed by the, let's say, the context, contradictions, and possibilities of the Russian context, but could be applied in other parts of the world as well. I think for all of the international students who've come and gone through the program, it's just the case for me. I think that the experience of living in Moscow is extremely interesting, unforgettable. Moscow is an extraordinarily interesting city, extremely frustrating one, extremely beautiful one, an extremely unique one. It really feels like a kind of a very different narrative universe than other places, for sure. And I think this contributes also in many ways to the success of the program. I think that if we did this program in, say, Berlin or London or Los Angeles, it would have a very different outcome. I think that particularly for the international students, this sort of delinking from those contexts, which can be a bit of a kind of echo chamber, is absolutely necessary to actually kind of like just being genuine, actually sort of having a space of genuine creativity, critical creativity, technical exploration are in this as well. And for the Russian students, I think that this is obviously still the case. But it operates in a somewhat different way. So, for sure, the Russian context is a deeply important part of what we're doing, and the research we're doing, and all the projects that come out of are ones that are directly engaging with that, and directly engaging with that as well. So this question of the particularity of Russia versus taking Russia, the Russian context is a particular site, and the Russian context is something that is exemplary of a larger condition, positively or negatively. It works on both registers, for sure. What kind of personal qualities does the program value? Curiosity and perseverance. I think it would be two of the ones of this as well. I think that we are working with research questions in areas that we don't know the answers to. Nobody knows the answers to these questions. It's not a program for people who want to come in and listen to a lecture, write down the answers, internalize those answers, and repeat them. We're taking things we think we know and complicating them to where we really realize we didn't know that much about them, or that anyone does. I mean, as I'm saying, these are questions that are pressing, but they're ones that are open. And that the more we engage with them, the more open they become to a certain moment. And then there becomes a way in which the design process transforms this into something where we have to take that risk, take that step, and try to offer a possible response, a possible intervention, regardless of this fact. And so I think the curiosity is a really important part of it. I think students who are who are, given an open problem, that the student will jump into that the space of that open problem. And perseverance, I think, is a part of it. And that I mean both that it's a rigorous program. It's a lot of, it's just physically demanding of the amount of time that's spent in this as well, but it's extremely rewarding. There will be frustrating moments. Those frustrating moments will oftentimes be necessary to lead to the next, to the breakthrough that comes. I think that students that are willing to stick it through, and to realize that the more valuable work that they do, the more valuable answers they do, explorations they do, are ones that will only come that will only come by sort of passing through this gauntlet are important. And I think also thirdly, students who are excited about the idea of collaborating with people, the types of people with a disciplinary and technical background that they've never collaborated with in the past. These are personal qualities that are important for this as well. It's this tight-knit group. We have 30 of us together for 5 months, and everyone's got to pull their, everyone pulls their weight. Everyone makes their contribution, but we value the different contributions of different people. Different people have different things to bring to the table, and everyone finds their role. Everyone sort of becomes more of who they are, in a good way, and I think that's what we're looking for. Can you tell us a bit more about what happened with the projects and alumni after the program? E.g., what forms has the research from Normal lived beyond the 5 months? Sure. Lots of different things. I think probably the most visible of these is a collaboration that has developed a space called Trust in Berlin, which is a kind of a mix of a kind of event space, co-working space that some of the alumni from the first year and the second year now manage, and it's one of the major, it's one of the key spaces in the rather active Berlin blockchain scene as well. I did a talk there last month, and extraordinarily well attended, and sort of it's a place where a lot of the community has sort of come together. So in each of the projects, it's been a little bit different. Some of the projects from the first year were more standalone cinematic projects, and then those have gone on to film festivals and things like that. Some of them were software projects that have now gone on to second and third generations of those apps and developing this as well. Other ones are in doing the more sort of the VC funding route. Other ones have gone on and have been published and continue to develop more as research projects. And so each of those paths are available for this as well. But publishing, exhibition, as well. All of the projects have taken on a life of their, taken on some version of a real life of their own, and picked up. Pretty much all of them have been. Actually, I think all of them have been written about by in other journals, magazines, other sorts of things like this as well. One of the interesting things is that there have been also, as mentioned, a few sort of new design practices that have developed out of the program, where people have sort of come together and collaborated and gone on to other things. They weren't necessarily the people who were working together in the groups. They sort of mix and match afterwards, which is fantastic. But we've seen any number of different sort of paths for success for this as well. But again, I think every project has gone on to other kinds of things. And then at the end of the third year, as I mentioned with this book, we'll be doing kind of a larger push in that regard too. We also have at least one marriage from the first year, and a couple other couplings up. Let's say they're sort of longer term as well. So it's different than the projects, but projects are. I suppose projects take lots of different forms. But in summary, cinematic projects have gone on to sort of film festivals. Startups have been successful in this regard as well. Exhibition structures as well, publishing structures, and so people come in with one thing and it leaves with another. One thing I can say though is that I think that if I were to ask the researchers what they would want their project, what kind of outcome they would want for the project at the beginning of the program, before they started, and then looked at the things that they've actually taken their project and how they've extended it out into the world and what they've done or how they've leveraged it after the program, they're not necessarily the same thing. They're part of the process of the transformation of what kind of practice does someone want to have, and how should that practice connect with the outside world. That's part of the transformation process itself. Would you recommend certain readings one should go through before applying? Sure. I think the first thing to do, and some of these are on the website, thenewnormal.strelka.com, but one thing that I would strongly recommend is familiarizing yourself with the work of the core faculty. So that would be myself. So the book, The Stack. It's a big book, as much as you get through, but there's lots of video lectures on this as well, where it sort of summarizes it, which are probably helpful. Keller Easterling's work, Extra Statecraft, but again, there are also video lectures of this work. Liam's, Metahaven, Lev, Etienne, all the Dunn and Raby. So that would be for those who are less familiar with the work of this faculty, the YouTube was probably a good place to start for this as well, and then the works by this core faculty, I think, is probably a good place to start. There are other readings on this as well. Now, for those of you we oftentimes will have people who are admitted to the program who may have very strong technical skills, may have something else, but are less familiar with, for disciplinary reasons, with some of the theoretical discourse that we'll engage in, particularly at the beginning of the program. And for those admitted students, we provide them resources so that in the months before the program starts, they can kind of hit the ground running. But for the most part, videos by the faculty is a good place to start. Does the program encourage and study research regarding the aesthetic and experiential aspects of urban space? Sure. I think that's part of it. I think we're interested in also challenging some of the aesthetics and experiences of urban spaces, and I think we kind of start with the presumption that maybe some of the transformations that are happening in urban spaces are ones that we don't know how to read aesthetically yet. We don't know how to read, and so it's less about making something that's beautiful that using aesthetics as a way of interpreting and understanding what is, what was, what's coming, and a way of a way of reading it, a way of understanding it, as a way of experiencing it, a way of making sense of it. And so making sense it certainly involves all of our senses, involves sensuality, it involves the experiential aspect of it as well. But at the same time, I think we want to sort of get a sense of how it is that these particular registers of experience or aesthetics can come into play, or already coming into play, that would lead in different kinds of design directions in one way or another. I would also say that to complicate this a bit further, we're also interested not just aesthetics for, there's aesthetics for people, and there's ways in which, even for, let's say, machine vision systems, that how it is that they read the city and how it is that they read them is maybe quite different than the way we do. But we have something to, there's something to learn from this, and something to read how they read the city in a different way. All of which is to say, I suppose, is yes, but we see the aesthetic as an open question, not just how can we make things more beautiful and be done with it, but the way in which the question of the aesthetic has to do with a bigger picture of how it is that a larger urban ecology of people and buildings and places and things sense one another and make sense of one another. And in this sense, I think aesthetics is extremely important. Right. So I'll also mention that another thing that might be helpful with the reading, and this is actually a good point to about, is there the Strelka Press. The Strelka also has a press. The first book in the press was a book, or not the first book in the New Normal series was a book, Little Red and Blue book that I wrote called The New Normal, which is available from the Strelka Press. There's digital EPUB versions of it floating all around the interwebs. And that's a kind of manifesto / syllabus for the program. It was written before the program started. So it was a bit of a kind of, not sure what we're going to get ourselves into here. Here's what I hope happens. And it's actually been successful beyond my my initials and ambitions. So this is another good thing. Keller Easterling has another book that came in the press called Medium Design. Metahaven has a book that just came out from Strelka Press called Digital Tarkovsky. Lev, Etienne, there are other books that are about to come out from the series as well. But those 3 books that are out now also will be very helpful for the reading of this as well. Okay, I think those are all the questions that were posted for this as well. If there's any last few, now's the time. I'll wait a little bit, and we can go from there. Okay, so if there's not any other questions for this from this as well, again, the key URL, the new normal, all one word, .strelka.com. Should have all the contact information that you need. Again, Nikolai is doing the process webinar on Tuesday the 16th, October 16th, which should help go through a little bit of those the nuts and bolts of the application process there as well. All the updates will be on the site here as well, and I really look forward to meeting some of you. Many of the best researchers we had last few years were people who originally had we connected with through this webinar. Right, let me give you one last URL here, which is apply.strelka.com. That's the URL that you'll need for the application process. Again, due November 1st. We've got a few more weeks left for this as well. And so please log on, please get them in, and we would look forward to working with you. Okay, hopefully see some of you in February, and thanks for hanging out. Thanks for taking the time, and I'll speak with you soon. Best, thanks.